During an unplanned dinner stop, Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré, made a surprising discovery. His former school friend was working quietly as a waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Instead of ignoring the moment, Traoré's next action stunned everyone in the restaurant. What he did not only changed her life forever, but also left the entire room emotional and in tears. This powerful story of humility, compassion, and true leadership is spreading across the globe, showing a side of Traoré the world rarely sees. It was late evening when President Ibrahim Traoré's convoy rolled down a quiet street on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The schedule was tight, but hunger had a way of slowing even the busiest men. Against protocol, he asked his driver to pull over at a modest roadside restaurant with flickering lights and wooden chairs that looked older than the building itself. His guards exchanged nervous glances. This was not planned, not secured. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of grilled meat and spices. Families whispered in low tones, staring as the young president entered with his plain shirt, trying to blend in. The room froze for a moment before soft claps of respect filled the space. He smiled politely and chose a corner table. Then something unusual caught his eyes. A waitress, moving quietly with a tired expression, seemed oddly familiar. Her steps were slow, her hands trembling as she carried plates. She avoided looking at him as though afraid to be recognized. Traoré leaned forward, his heart pounding, not from politics or power, but from memory. Could it be her? His school friend from years ago. The room suddenly felt smaller. The night was about to change forever. The waitress placed a jug of water on his table, and for the first time, her eyes lifted to meet his. The moment stretched like eternity. Behind those weary eyes, Traoré saw flashes of schoolyards, laughter, and the innocence of youth. Her name escaped his lips, almost in a whisper. Awa! The jug nearly slipped from her hands. She froze, her breath shaky. Slowly, recognition washed over her face, followed by disbelief. Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes before she quickly looked away, muttering, "Excuse me." The president sat stunned. The girl he once studied beside, sharing notebooks, sharing dreams, was now standing before him, dressed in a faded uniform, serving strangers to survive. He noticed the cracks in her shoes, the faint scar on her hand, the stiffness in her movements. Life had clearly not been kind. His guards, confused, leaned in, but he waved them off. The restaurant's patrons sensed something was happening, watching in silence. Traoré's chest tightened. This was not just a chance meeting. It was a reminder of life's cruel turns, of how two people who once dreamed side by side could end up in such different worlds. Awa disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Traoré staring at the empty doorway. He could still see her trembling hands. His memories raced. Late-night study sessions, promises of a brighter future. Her brilliant laughter that once inspired him. Now all that remained was silence and struggle etched onto her face. He excused himself from the table and slowly walked toward the back. The staff froze as he passed. Some lowered their heads, unsure if they should stop him. But his calm expression carried a weight no one dared question. In the dimly lit kitchen, he found her leaning against the wall, wiping her tears with a corner of her apron. She looked fragile, almost broken. "Why didn't you ever reach out?" he asked gently. Her voice cracked. "How could I? You're the president and me?" She gestured at her uniform. "I can barely feed my children." The words stabbed him like knives. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the sound of her sobs. In that moment, the leader vanished, and only Ibrahim, the childhood friend, remained. His heart burned with sorrow. He knew he couldn't walk away. Not this time. The entire restaurant was about to witness something unforgettable. The kitchen door swung softly behind them, but outside the restaurant's silence deepened. People leaned closer to one another, whispering, trying to make sense of the scene. Nobody dared to interrupt. Awa lowered her eyes, afraid to meet Traoré's steady gaze. "I never wanted you to see me like this," she whispered. "Back then, I had so many dreams. Now every day is just about surviving." Her words cut through him like a blade. He could feel her shame pressing against the walls of that small kitchen. For a moment, Ibrahim wasn't the head of state. He was a man facing the reality of how unfair life could be. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Awa, nothing you do is shameful. Serving others with dignity is more honorable than many things I've seen in politics." But she shook her head fiercely. "You don't understand. The debts, the sickness. My daughter needs medicine. I can't even afford." Her voice cracked into sobs. Trey stood still, stunned. A child's life hanging on money for medicine. The weight of that truth settled heavily in his chest. And he knew this night could not end the way it began. Word spread quickly through the restaurant. The president was speaking to the waitress. Every eye turned toward the kitchen door. The clatter of spoons and soft chatter faded until the only sound was the beating of anxious hearts. Then the door opened. Awa stepped out, wiping her swollen eyes, followed closely by Traoré. But instead of returning to his seat, he walked to the center of the room. People straightened in their chairs. Parents nudged their children to stay quiet. Even the guards looked uneasy, unsure of what their leader was about to do. Traoré's deep voice carried across the room. "Tonight, I have been reminded of something powerful. Leadership is not only about giving speeches or commanding soldiers. It is about remembering those who walked beside us before destiny separated our paths." Awa froze, trembling at his words. She never imagined her struggle would be exposed like this in front of strangers, but no one mocked her. Instead, tears already glistened in the eyes of some mothers and fathers, recognizing her pain as their own. The air was thick with emotion. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and the entire room could feel it. One of the guards stepped forward, whispering urgently, "Excellency, please. This is not safe. Let us leave." But Traoré raised his hand, silencing him. His gaze never left the faces before him. Ordinary people eating ordinary meals, now witnesses to a moment that would not be forgotten. He turned back toward Awa. "How long have you been carrying this burden alone?" Her lips trembled. "Too long," she said softly. For the first time in his presidency, Ibrahim ignored every layer of protocol, every rule written to keep power and people apart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own wallet. The gesture shocked his bodyguards, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the humility behind it. He placed the wallet on Awa's serving tray and spoke with quiet strength. "This is not charity. This is a reminder that no one should be invisible. Not to me, not to any of us." Gasps echoed across the restaurant. Some people covered their mouths. Others clutched their children tighter. The waitress stood frozen, staring at the wallet. Her tears spilled freely, falling onto the tray. The room waited, breathless, for what would happen next. When Trey's wallet rested on the tray, the restaurant turned into stone. No forks clinked. No one whispered. Even children seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Awa's fingers hovered above the wallet, but refused to touch it. Her pride battled her need. I can't take this from you," she stammered, her voice breaking. Traoré's eyes softened. "You're not taking Awa. You're receiving what should have been yours long ago. Dignity, opportunity, and the hand of a friend who never forgot you." The words echoed in the stillness. A man near the door wiped his eyes. A mother at the corner pulled her scarf to hide tears rolling down her cheeks. Awa's shoulders shook as silent sobs escaped. She finally whispered, "I thought the world had forgotten me." Traoré leaned closer, his tone steady and low. "Not while I breathe." At that moment, the silence broke, not with noise, but with the sound of dozens of hearts crumbling under the weight of compassion. The room had never felt so human, so raw. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered far beyond these four walls. A man stood up from his chair, his voice trembling. "Excellency, forgive me, but what you've shown tonight, we've never seen from a leader before. You reminded us we are not forgotten." Others murmured in agreement. Soon the whole room was nodding, some even clapping softly through their tears. But Traoré raised his hand for silence. "Do not praise me," he said firmly. "If there is honor tonight, it belongs to her." He pointed gently at Awa, who stood frozen in disbelief. "She is the face of our nation, strong, enduring, fighting quietly even when no one is watching. How many more women like her suffer in silence while leaders sit in palaces? This cannot continue." His words cracked through the air like thunder. Patrons bowed their heads, shaken not only by the truth, but by the courage of hearing it from a president himself. Awa clutched the tray, her tears now uncontrollable. For years she had carried her pain quietly. Tonight it was lifted into the light for the world to see. The restaurant became more than a place to eat. It had become a hall of truth. As the claps rose again, Awa suddenly swayed. The tray slipped from her hands, crashing onto the floor. Gasps filled the air. She staggered back, her knees giving way. Traoré rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. His guard surged too, but he barked, "Stand back." His arms cradled her like a sister, his face tight with fear. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I haven't eaten properly in days. I work to feed my children first." The room broke. Men and women wept openly, covering their faces. A few rushed to bring water, while others searched their pockets for anything to help. Traoré pressed her hand gently. "Not another word. Tonight you eat with me." He looked around at the stunned crowd. "And tomorrow the world will hear her story." The weight of his promise swept through the room. People realized they were no longer just witnesses. They were part of a moment that would spread far beyond Burkina Faso. As Awa slowly regained her breath in his arms, the entire restaurant felt like a family bound together by tears. The staff rushed to bring food as Traoré guided Awa gently to sit at his table. The restaurant fell into a hush again. It was unthinkable. A president dining with a struggling waitress. Yet it felt natural, even right. A steaming bowl of rice and sauce was placed before her. She hesitated, ashamed, but Traoré urged softly, "Please eat. For tonight, you are my guest." Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The first bite broke her. Tears streamed freely, and her shoulders trembled. "I can't remember the last time I ate without worry," she whispered. The patrons watched in silence, many unable to hold back their own tears. A simple meal had become something holy. Traoré himself ate quietly beside her, not as a leader, but as a brother. Each gesture spoke louder than speeches. Compassion needed no cameras, no stage. In that dimly lit room, people saw the kind of leader they had only prayed for. A man who carried the weight of others as if it were his own. The moment etched itself deep in every witness's heart. Something bigger than politics was unfolding. As the meal ended, Awa reached into her apron pocket with trembling fingers. She pulled out a crumpled photograph and laid it on the table. It was of a little girl, no more than 8, with big eyes and braided hair. "This is Mariam, my daughter," Awa said, her voice breaking. "She's sick. The doctors say she needs treatment I can't pay for." The picture passed from Awa's shaking hands into Traoré's steady palms. He stared at the child's smile, then at the weary mother sitting before him. The room grew heavier. Parents in the restaurant felt their throats tighten. This was not just Awa's story. It was theirs, too. Traoré closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. When he looked up again, his expression had changed. It was no longer just about kindness. It was about action. "Awa," he said, his voice firm yet tender. "Your daughter's fight is my fight now. She will have the care she needs, no matter the cost." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Some clutched their hearts. Others sobbed openly. Awa collapsed forward, clutching his hands, unable to speak. She had walked into work broken. Tonight, she was being given back her hope. The weight of Traoré's promise filled the room. People looked at each other as if to confirm that they were not dreaming. One man stood up. "Excellency, forgive me, but this night it must be remembered. Too often leaders make promises behind closed doors. You made yours in front of us all." The crowd murmured in agreement. They were not just diners anymore. They had become witnesses to something that would echo far beyond this evening. Traoré nodded solemnly. "Then let the world know," he said. "Let it be clear that leadership means lifting others, not standing above them." The staff, usually invisible, now stood at the edges, weeping quietly. Mothers hugged their children tighter. A father whispered to his son, "Remember this night. Remember what a true leader looks like." Awa, still clutching the photograph, finally managed to whisper, "Why me? Why would you care about me after all these years?" Traoré leaned closer. "Because no friend is ever forgotten, and because your struggle is the struggle of our nation." The words rang through the silence, heavy with truth. The restaurant was no longer just a place of food. It had become a temple of humanity. As the night drew on, one of Traoré's aides slipped into the restaurant holding a ringing phone. "Excellency, urgent calls are waiting from the capital," he whispered. Traoré shook his head. "They can wait tonight. This is where I must be." His tone left no room for argument. But as he turned back to Awa, he gently asked, "Do you trust me to help marry him? If so, let me prove it. Now." He pulled out his own phone and dialed the Minister of Health directly. The room hushed again as his voice carried, calm but firm. "Prepare immediate treatment for a child named Mariam. The expenses are to be covered in full. I will personally follow her case." Awa gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. The entire restaurant listened in awe. It was not a hidden promise. It was a command spoken before them all. When he ended the call, Traoré placed his phone down. "It is done," he said simply. The words hit harder than thunder. Tears fell across the room like rain, for everyone understood. He wasn't just helping Awa. He was rewriting what leadership meant. Awa dropped to her knees before him, sobbing uncontrollably. "How do I thank you? How can I ever repay you?" Traoré quickly bent down and lifted her gently. "You owe me nothing. What you will repay is by raising Mariam with love and strength. That is worth more than anything." The people could no longer hold back. A man cried openly into his hands. A young woman whispered, "If only all leaders cared this way." Even the guards, trained to be stone-faced, blinked rapidly to hide their wet eyes. For Awa, it felt unreal. Just hours ago, she was carrying trays with an empty stomach. Now, the president himself was carrying her burden. Suddenly, someone in the back began clapping. Then another joined, and soon the whole restaurant erupted into applause. The sound wasn't for power or politics. It was for humanity, for a moment that had touched every soul. Awa hugged her photograph tightly, whispering over and over, "Thank you, God. Thank you." And in that wave of emotion, people knew they would never forget what they had seen with their own eyes. By dawn, whispers of the night before had already begun to spread. A young student who had filmed discreetly with his phone posted the video online. Within hours, it began flooding across social media. Clips of Traoré sitting with Awa comforting her and promising help for Mariam. Headlines quickly followed a president's humanity at a roadside restaurant. Comment sections overflowed with tears and prayers. People shared their own struggles, saying they finally felt seen. Back at the restaurant, staff members gathered, still stunned by what had happened. "We didn't just serve dinner," one cook said quietly. "We served history." Meanwhile, Awa sat with her daughter at home, cradling Mariam tightly. For the first time in years, she felt hope warming her chest like sunlight after a long storm. Traoré, though back in his office, carried the memory with him. He knew the world had seen a glimpse of leadership stripped of titles. And he also knew this was only the beginning. The story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to the nation, and to anyone who believed that compassion could still exist in the highest places of power. By the next morning, the story had reached radio stations and television networks. Markets buzzed with people replaying the video on their phones. Taxi drivers shared the tale with passengers. Mothers repeated it to their children before school. For once, it wasn't about politics or conflict. It was about a leader's heart. Traoré sat in his office, watching quietly as the reports poured in. His advisors urged him to prepare an official statement, but he shook his head. "I don't need to explain kindness," he said simply. Meanwhile, Awa and her daughter Mariam were escorted to a hospital for treatment. Doctors and nurses inspired by the president's actions volunteered their time and resources. The little girl clutched her mother's hand as hope returned to her tired eyes. Ordinary citizens began asking themselves a hard question. If the president can stop for one struggling woman, what can I do for my neighbor? The story was no longer just Awa's. It had awakened something larger. An entire nation remembering its shared humanity. Days later, Awa walked through her neighborhood, no longer invisible. Strangers greeted her warmly. Some even embraced her, saying, "We saw you on the news. You gave us courage." Her small house, once filled with despair, now echoed with laughter as Mayam's condition began to improve. The treatment had started, and with it came a renewed will to live. One afternoon, a government car arrived outside her door. Officials stepped out, delivering documents confirming that Awa had been offered stable employment through a community program initiated by the president himself. No more struggling in silence. She clutched the papers, overwhelmed. "It feels like God himself remembered me," she whispered. That night, Awa knelt beside Mayam's bed and prayed. Not for money, not for comfort, but for strength to carry the gift she had been given. For the first time in years, she slept peacefully. In the palace, Traoré received the news of her new life. A small smile spread across his face. "This is how change begins," he murmured. "One person at a time." By the end of the week, international media had picked up the story. Headlines read, "Burkina Faso's president shows the world true leadership." Leaders from abroad commented, praising not his power, but his humility. Back in Ouagadougou, the restaurant where it all happened became a symbol. People visited not for food, but to stand in the very spot where compassion rewrote destiny. Awa and Mayam visited the restaurant again, not as a waitress and her child, but as honored guests. Patrons stood and applauded as they entered. Tears filled Awa's eyes. She had gone from shame to dignity in less than a week. Traoré joined them quietly, shaking hands with ordinary citizens. No speeches, no cameras, just presence. The lesson was simple but unforgettable. Leadership is not measured by titles, but by how deeply one touches a single life. As this story spread across the world, it reminded millions that kindness is the strongest form of power. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, don't just leave in silence. Hit subscribe so you never miss these true moments of humanity. Click like if you believe the world needs more leaders like Ibrahim Traoré. And most importantly, drop a comment. Share your tears, your thoughts, and your hope. Because tonight, it's not just a story. It's a call for compassion we all can answer.